Here.
And Mr. Peterson.
I'm present.
All members are present.
All right, well, fantastic. Well, I guess we'll go with new business. And are we going to do the presentation first, or are we going to get the election update first, Erica?
Let's do the presentation first.
Okay. All right. Well, so are the Division of Elections, are they present? They have their presentation ready to go?
Yes, we have Carol Thompson with us from the Division of Elections, and I'm going to turn it over to Carol, but I will be running her PowerPoint for her.
Okay, sounds great. Proceed.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Carol Thompson. I'm with the State of Alaska Division of Elections. I am the operations manager for the division. I've been with the division for almost 31 years, so I've seen this process for a number of years that I'm going to talk about today. Starting with page 2 of the presentation, we do annual list maintenance following Alaska Statute 1507-130 that falls within the legal boundaries of the federal law under the National Voter Registration Act, and we do this on a yearly basis, which starts in December and is finalized by the first part of March. It is a two-step process to perform list maintenance following the statute. So moving on to the next page, we're at step 1, which in December, we extract all of the voters in our system that have not had any activity in the last 4 years. And we prepare the first notice, which is sent by non-forwardable mail to those voters. The notice is printed with the voter's name and current mailing address in the voter registration database system. The notice also asks on the front of it if the person that it's going to is not the person that lives at that address, basically, or gets mail at that address, to return that card as undeliverable, because the primary the primary thing that triggers an activation is notices returned as undeliverable. So we have those undeliverable notices. We, if they have a forwarding address on them from the USPS, we update their mailing address in our system. And if they don't have one, then of course we don't. But then we flag all those voters accordingly for step 2 of the process. If we receive notices returned to the Division of Elections requesting cancellation by the voter, then of course we take the steps and we cancel them from the rolls. If we receive notifications requesting to maintain their registration, of course, we will maintain their registration. We update any information they provide us on that form, because the form does allow for them to update their information, or if it hasn't changed, just to keep them active in the system by updating their last contact date. Notices that are not returned, basically, the voters remain registered in the system. It's all based upon undeliverable return of this notice. And I want to go back to the inactivity just to clarify that inactivity means, not submitting a voter registration form, not calling the division, not voting. So it's basically they haven't provided us with anything for 4 years. Once that has been completed, which is about 30 days, we allow for those notices to be returned. We then move into step 2, and I'm on the next page, Erica. And that notice,
Carol,
yes.
Carol, this is Barbara. Could I ask you a question about step 1?
Sure.
So on step 1, you've got those voters in category 3 that have requested the division to maintain their registration. Are those voters then in the list maintenance status or in the RG registered status?
They would then be moved back into the RG status, Barbara. We would update their information and change them back to RG.
Thank you very much.
So for those out who may not understand what ARG means, it means an active registered voter. So moving into step 2, we send it out approximately 30 days. The second notice is sent out. It is sent by forwarding mail to all the voters whose first notice was returned as undeliverable. Voters have then 45 days to respond to the second notice. If at the end of the 45-day period we don't receive a response, then the voter's record is inactivated. Inactive records will then remain in the database for an additional 4 years in an inactive purge status, or as some of the elections folks know, IPU. During this period of time, if a person were to vote or contact the voter or send in a form, of course, if they send in a form or contact, we would activate them back to an active registered voter status. If they vote, then they would be required to vote a questioned ballot in the election, and then that questioned ballot in turn is used to update their registration information and activate them back into the system. If they have no contact for that 4-year period, then they are completely removed from the database. Moving on. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Carol. I've got a question from Mr. Gates. Go ahead, Mr. Gates. Dean, you're probably on mute.
Sorry. Now I'm unmuted, I think. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think my question was similar to yours. Carol, during the inactive status, is there any contact initiated or notices sent from the division to the voter when they're in inactive status?
That's part of the notification that we send, is we let them know that they are scheduled to be inactivated if they do not respond. And again, that's part of the notice. And that notice is, if that notice is returned undeliverable, they probably don't get the notice, but that's the only address we have for them to notify them. So.
Well, during that 4-year period, I guess. Yes. Inactive records remain for 4 years. During that 4-year period, then nothing else is sent to them?
No, nothing else is sent to them. Correct. They remain inactive for, basically, they have a total of 8 years of being inactive and not contacting the division in any shape or form, including,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then at that point,
excuse me,
okay.
Carol, Ms.
Yes.
Kennedy has a question as well. Proceed, Ms. Kennedy.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. Carol, in regard to really what that inactive status does, I guess I'm thinking that it means that that person is still considered a registered voter in the state and could vote at any point. So their name stays on the registration roll. It just kind of, for your purposes, starts a countdown, so to speak, by which at the end of 4 years, if you haven't heard anything or seen any activity out of them, then they're removed. But during that 4-year period, it's a little bit of a grace period in there where they're still considered registered voters, and will be until the end of that 4-year time period. At that point, then their name could be removed from the database. Is that,
that is correct.
Okay,
Ms. Kennedy, that is correct. But they don't appear on lists or the precinct register or things of that nature. That's why when they go vote at the polls for state elections, their name's not going to be on the precinct register, and they will be asked to vote a question ballot, and therefore we can get current information and activate their record accordingly, and make that determination at that point.
Okay, well, that is an important difference then. So you're saying that once you put them on that inactive status for that 4-year period, they are not going to be considered, their name is not going to show up on the voter registration rolls when somebody goes to vote.
That is correct.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Constant?
Yep, thanks. In fact, Mr. Wheeler just put in the comment chat what I was going to speak to, that practically for the municipality, what that means is those are individuals we do not mail ballots to. And so the theory there is these individuals who move into this category become less of an expense, but can still vote, can still go down to one of our vote centers and grab a ballot when they sign up there and address it that way. And this is a kind of a question for both the presenter and for Erica. Erica, do you know how many ballots in the last election we had that were returned or not cast that we did print that are going to be moving towards this category? Because I know it's not a small number.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, I would have to look up that number, so I can provide that to the committee after the meeting, but I don't have it at my fingertips.
And I think it was something around 20,000 when we first kind of went into this that we oversent. And I mean, when you think about the cost per ballot, it's a huge financial impact.
The undeliverables were 13,000 is what I have in my notes.
The last time. Thanks.
Yeah. Proceed, Carol.
Okay, moving on to the next page, Erica, please. I can't see if it moved because I have really bad lag time in my office. My broadband is maxed out here. So we're moving into voter cancellation, and I wanted to kind of talk about this area because Alaska does do additional things, and we are a member of the Electronic Registration Information Center, which we refer to as ERIC, and we are a member along with 30 other states in Washington, D.C. It initially started, I think when we initially started out, we were with like 21 states, and slowly states have been joining this program. One of the things we do is a cross-state match where ERIC compares Alaska's database against these other states and Washington, D.C. And yearly we send a notice requesting if there's more activity in the other state. We request voter intent to the voter. We send a notice of voter intent to the voter. And again, we kind of follow the same thing with list maintenance process. If they request it that they want cancellation, we of course cancel their record. And then of course, if they want to maintain their registration, the voter records are updated. And then notices that we don't hear anything for, we don't do anything because Alaska is an intent to return state. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Going on to the next page of the slides, weekly, the Division of Elections, we process notifications received from other states. So other states will send us notification that this person is now registered in their state, and then we automatically will cancel them in our state. And we in turn do the same thing to other states. How consistent that is across the board, you know, Alaska is kind of lucky in one sense that we are a statewide system versus a county-based system. Other states rely on counties to feed that information. And we rely on getting that information from other counties. Daily and weekly, we of course receive notification from voters individually that contact us and say they're no longer in the state of Alaska and wish to cancel their registration. And so we of course work on canceling those. Moving on to the next slide, we also have, we are very involved in making sure that all deceased voters are removed from the database as soon as we can. Monthly, we do receive a list of deceased voters from Vital Statistics, and we identify those based upon the information provided by Vital Stats with the voter registration system, and we would inactivate those voters from the lists. We also review obituaries because sometimes people will die outside the state of Alaska and we'll get a notification in the obituary printed. And if we're able to identify that person, we of course will remove that person from the records as well. We also do ERIC again comes into play where Alaska will compare, ERIC will compare Alaska's database against the Social Security Administration database, and will report any deceased voters they see there, and we of course take the next step and remove them from the system. So we're pretty active about that as well. We do attempt to do, of course, you know, clean up. Moving on to the next slide, Erica, of registration.
Just
Go
a
ahead.
second, Carol. Mr. Constant has got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, comment really. You know, it's very interesting on that previous slide, this your process for removing deceased individuals. Just as it happens, like a month and a half ago, my sister was made the kind of the individual in charge of an estate of an individual, and we were trying to figure out where he was registered to vote, whether it was here or Texas. We couldn't figure it out. And ultimately, I'm like, just call the division. And she did, and figured out that within weeks you had already removed this deceased individual from the voter rolls. And so it was quite impressive and accurate. And I just want to give you kudos for that.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Constant. We appreciate that. We try our best to keep up with things.
Okay,
So go ahead.
thank you. Go, proceed.
Oh, okay, thank you. So in regards to registration, yearly, bi-yearly and even numbered years, we of course working with Eric again. Eric will compare the DMV, Alaska's DMV database against the voter registration database, and they will see if there's more current information and activity with the DMV. And in this case, if there is, we will send notification to those voters informing them how they could update their registration, which is basically through our voter registration system or by contacting our office directly to get an application. We also work with Eric in researching our records for perhaps any duplicate registrations that may take place. Sometimes, a person may change their name and things come across and it was a typo by the voter providing information or a typo by staff, and a duplicate record gets added into the system. So they do a comparison as well. Our system also does the same thing. Our voter registration database system, we have methods of checking our system on a regular basis. It does an automatic check for us in which we get a report if anything matches, like social security number or last four social security number and date of birth and potentially last name. So it does a variety of automatic checks, plus we run reports on a quarterly basis to check for anything of that nature that may come up of slight difference of name and information. We also, of course, you probably are all very well aware, we have the PFD automatic voter registration, in which we perform that process yearly after the deadline for the permanent fund applicants. And so we get the list from the PFD of eligible voters in the first part of April. We begin preparing that list, and we do notices. The opt-out notices are typically sent towards the end of April. Voters have 30 days to respond to the opt-out notice, and if they do not respond to the opt-out notice, then we perform permanent fund automatic voter registration, in which we will either update their registration if we have more current information. We always update their registration date to show current contact. If they're a new voter, we add them to the system. And if they have no change, if there's no change in their system, in their residence address, we really don't do anything. We don't even send them the opt-out. It's only those that have a change to their residence address or maybe a new voter that we send the opt-out notice to. So that updates their information as well. Moving on to the next slide is basically, I gave you 4-year statistics there. You can look at that. I do 4 years because we're kind of on a 4-year cycle when we do things based off of our list maintenance law or federal law as well. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the things that we have been working towards in activation. And of course, I'm sure you probably all know how many registered voters we have. And that's basically the end of my presentation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Carol. Appreciate the information.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Weaver has got a question here in the chat. Can you touch on, Carol, can you touch on the recent change where the state has created a new status category for us so we can better avoid mailing to active voters who haven't voted or had contact in 4 years and are being moved to inactive? The December to March state process seems well timed to give the municipality of Anchorage a clean voter list for mailing, as we do under current law. The PFD thing is a whole other creature.
So yes, so we adjusted our timeline to assist in trying to get the cleaner list or the inactive voters or removed prior to the final list that the MOA would extract. So in the last, in my last slide, you'll see that down there at the bottom, we have, and I do everything statewide. I know you guys are MOA, but we have 14,168 people targeted for the March in activation. And of those people, that they'll be inactivated around the March 1st, I think March 1st or March 2nd. So that'll be in time before the last extraction that the MOA will get once the registration deadline is passed for them. We also have worked with the MOA in regards to the people who we receive undeliverable mail from. If they're already in list maintenance status, we call it active LM, is a code that we use in our system. If during the year we get a undeliverable mail for that particular person because we've sent something out ourselves, or in the case of the MOA when they send their notices out, we also will change, instead of changing them to LM or activating back to ARG, we change their status to LU, meaning they're still in the list maintenance process and they're undeliverable mail, so that they can see that those in fact are undeliverable.
I see. Okay, Ms. LaFrance has got a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So people are often surprised to learn that the state manages the voter database. And one question we get, or I've gotten from some constituents, is there any way that they can be marked as an in-person voter so that they would not receive ballots by mail? And would you speak to that? I know it sounds very simple, but I also know that when it comes to databases and programming and working, with all of Alaska, it's not so straightforward. But would you speak to that? Thanks.
I really don't know if I'm the best person to speak to that, because Alaska Division of Elections does not do all vote by mail. I don't know if the MOA would have a way of tracking voters who wish to not participate via by mail ballot.
I believe we'd have to create a new category. I'm not aware of a current category that a voter like that would fit in. Maybe Ms. Jones or Ms. McConnell has some more information on that, but
I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that, Suzanne. I think that is a very complicated question, because as Carol said, the database belongs to the state. And, one of the things that we try to do is minimal adjustments to the database. We do make some minor adjustments, like, for example, this week, Liz had some voters who have no address in the municipality. And of course, we're trying to figure out what their correct address is, if we can. But outside of that, I think this is really going to be like an IT type question. And I think we'd need to consult with our project manager and see if there's some way that this could be a possibility. And then remember, all of those requests would have to come to the clerk's office. So we'd have to process those, not the state. But anyway, we can talk with our project manager, or he can jump in on this if he has some thoughts about that.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Constant, you're next.
Either works. My pronouns are very diverse. So, the conversation about voter removal is inherently hazardous in a political sense. And of course, the cure to allegations of any kind of shenanigans from one side or the other is transparency. And so does the state have a really clear communications plan that rolls around this process so that early in the process and often in the process, the public is notified, not just in the specific voter sense, but in the broader community sense.
So we do. So you're talking about the list maintenance process when we
Voter
send the
removal.
yeah, when we send the first notices out. Well, we do have we do press releases prior to the second notice being before the deadline. Basically, we'll post that. It's been posted on our web, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. So pretty limited.
Yeah, the notification does go out, of course, and that you know, if nothing happens to their, if nothing happens, it's not returned or anything of that nature. Again, they remain in the system.
No, so
Yeah.
we're talking slightly different issues. I think you're talking about a specific direct to voter communication. You may be removed from the list. What I'm talking about is broader communication other than just a simple press release, kind of that is targeted to say, we're working on this. These are the steps of the process. Here's where we are in the process. As a broad community message, we want you to know if you feel like you won't be on the list, you can check here, you know, a way to communicate to the public so there's bright light shining on it, as opposed to just kind of a mechanical process targeting just those voters who are being removed.
We have done that. I don't know if we've done it in particularly this year, but we have sent out, you know, like we've posted on our web that this is happening, with step 1, step 2 are happening on our web. We haven't done like advertising. We are required under agreement that we do radio notifications in our rural areas where language assistance is required, and we put out language email, and we have done, you know, radio ads as well in different areas, PSAs and things of that nature.
That's kind of what I'm hopeful that it's broadly done, clearly done, so that
we do
can't be approved.
Yeah, we do PSAs and things of that nature as well, and then we also target, like I said, the language assistance areas that we are required to do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And I just thought of a question. You were talking about, you know, if they haven't voted in 4 years, and they get another 4 years to be in inactive status. Mm-hmm. Is the reason you chose overall 8 years, is that because that would be 2 presidential election cycles? So you figure if they haven't bothered to vote in a couple of presidential elections?
Yeah, it is part of the federal. It is part of the federal voting requirements.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I was just happened to wonder about that.
Yes.
Is there more of the presentation?
No, I'm done unless you have more questions for me.
Any more questions from any members of the committee? Mr. Gates is typing. Go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess just a question out of curiosity. As I understood it, if a voter's in inactive status, but then I guess they show up and vote, question ballot, they decide to show up and vote suddenly. Municipalities throughout the state, after they have their local election, they send a list, right, of who voted or something. I mean, the state gets, I guess, some notion or some communication where they get people who voted that were inactive and change their status because they voted in that recent local election. Is that right? And if that's true, do we have maybe some data or numbers in terms of how many voters in the municipality of Anchorage in the last election were in inactive status but showed to vote at that election and became active after?
In response to your question, Mr. Gates, municipalities typically follow the same forms that the state uses for their question and absentee in-person voting, which includes a floppy, or we call it a floppy, but it's a voter registration form that's attached to the actual envelope itself. And it's the habit of, and the process that as far as my knowledge, every single community will send those over to us for voter registration data entry to activate the voter's record. And so we usually get all those, floppies, as we call them, or voter registration forms after their elections, and we update the voter's record accordingly. In addition, we also receive, and by law, municipalities are required to provide to us their voter history from their local elections, who participated in their election, to us within 60 days of their election. And of course, the state will update their voting records accordingly with their voter history. As far as the municipality, how they handle how many they had, I can't tell you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gates. And do you happen to have that information, Ms. McConnell or Ms. Jones?
Mr. Chair, we are actually going to get our reports changed so that we will have that information, but we do not have it for the past elections.
Okay, fantastic. That's something we can look at, after the mayoral election is completed later this spring. Any other questions or comments about this presentation? Mr. Constant is typing.
Yep, thank you. With things as they are today, I don't know if this is in statute, but you might change the term canceled to something else, removed or other, because cancel is now a politically charged term.
Oh, that's just me speaking. I think the law says they're purged or inactivated. Sorry.
No need to apologize. I just want to help you avoid landmines.
There you go. Choose your words carefully. Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, I certainly appreciate the presentation and all the information, Carol. And I appreciate all the cooperation between the municipality and the state when it comes to elections. And, we'll continue working together going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have the next item on our agenda is an election update. And this will be the election that's upcoming. Do you have that information for us, Erica?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would like to report to the committee that everything is on schedule for our April 6th regular election. We have 177 ballot styles identified, and these ballot styles contain 28 distinct ballot types. Our ballots are currently with our printing vendor, and on March 1st, our vendor will mail ballot packages to 586 overseas voters. So these are voters who are registered in Anchorage, but currently have a mailing address that is overseas for whatever reason. Oftentimes it's because they are in the military. On March 15th, our printing and mailing vendor will mail ballot packages to 226,882 voters in Alaska and the United States. Our Anchorage vote centers will open on Monday, March 29th, and they will be open every day, including the weekend through Election Day. We have adjusted the hours this year so that they will be open until 6 o'clock on weekdays so that people have an opportunity to go after work. And again, all the vote centers that we are opening will be open on the weekends, not just the Lusac Library, which is what we have done historically. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, but everything is going smoothly.
Well, thank you, Erica. Ms. LaFrance has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just so that I have the dates correct, on March 15th, ballots go out in the mail, and on March 29th, in-person vote centers open. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then would you also say what the difference is? You said 177 styles with 28 types. Could you say a little bit more about what that means? Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. LaFrance, through the chair. Yeah, that can be kind of confusing. So a ballot style indicates a difference of precinct or service area. So for instance, let's just take the West Anchorage Assembly District, which is the district that I live in. There's only one ballot type in all of West Anchorage because all of West Anchorage is in the same service areas and the same assembly district, but there are something along the lines of 15 or 20 different precincts within West Anchorage. So there is a ballot style for each precinct. Now, if you look at District 6, where you have a lot of different service areas, road service areas, you have a multiple number of ballot styles there because that's also where you have your road service area boundary, your fire service area boundary, your park service area boundaries. So you may have one precinct, but it will have multiple different little sections where, you know, these residents are in the road service area and in the parks area, but outside of the fire service area. But these other group of residents in the same precinct are outside of the road service area, but in the parks area and in the fire service area. So each one of those gets a distinct ballot style. However, because many of our propositions are area wide, the ballot type may be the same. So the 28 distinct ballot types recognize 24 different service areas, which each have their own service area board election, one extra ballot type for the Bear Valley service area annexation reflected in Proposition 9. One ballot type for the Midtown Assembly District reflecting the recall, one ballot type for an area-wide ballot, which only contains area-wide races, and we use for when people have moved between ballot types but not updated their voter registration, and then one ballot type for essentially everybody else. Does that make sense? I know it's a little complicated.
It does. Thanks so much. It sounds like you need a computer program or something to track all that. Sounds like a lot of work. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris has got a question about the map. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Erica, was that map new this year? I think I saw somewhere that it was the map that links to all the various ballots.
The ballot styles, no, we have put up a sample ballot style map each year.
Okay, yeah, that's a very helpful tool. Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just really want to compliment the MOA elections team. In Erica's overview, I hope you noticed that she is talking about more opportunities for voters to vote and make sure their vote counts. And the first one is mailing the ballot packages to overseas voters. We're modeling the state system where military and overseas voters are sent their ballot. They get a longer timeline to vote. And I'm really proud that Erica figured out how to do that, and it's happening. And the second thing that Erica told you about is that we're opening the vote centers until 6 p.m. Typically, they closed at 5 p.m., but people need to vote after they get off of work. And then we're also opening all of the vote centers on Saturdays and Sundays. So again, I'm really proud of the team for coming up with new ways to help people vote.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, one of the main reasons we decided to switch over to vote by mail was to encourage more participation among voters. And so if we're allowing them to vote on weekends, hopefully even more will turn out this year.
Mr. Chair, I would love to follow up on that. You are right. Vote at home and vote by mail systems not only give people more opportunities to vote at home, but it also gives people more opportunities to vote in person. And we're trying to make that happen. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's all about voting. It's, we want to encourage people to vote. Participation is a good thing. And so, do we have any additional information about the election that you'd like to present to us, Ms. McConnell?
No, Mr. Chair.
We're good to go, okay? So, all about the voting, correct. So we can go back down to do some old business. Do we have any legislative priorities from the committee that we want to? We talked about stamp being a thing of value for the legislative committee last year, but do we have anything additional this year that we want to work on or talk about, consider?
Pete, Christopher here.
Mr. Constant.
Thank you. One thing we just need to be monitoring is SB 39, and its initial framing would remove our ability to operate a vote by mail election. And I understand that it's evolved a couple of times and we don't know where or how it's going officially, but I understand that the mover of that bill has clarified that he doesn't intend to take away the municipality's right to conduct its elections as it sees fit, but it certainly begs our attention. We don't want to be preempted.
Correct. And I was wondering, and maybe Mr. Gates could give us some information on this. I thought maybe since we were a home rule municipality that we might still be able to have vote by mail, even if that bill that had been introduced passed. I'm not 100% sure on that, but do you have, what do you think about that question, Mr. Gates?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Erica for notifying us about this bill being introduced. And I actually haven't looked into it very thoroughly. Since it just got started, I think there's much process to go through, but we will monitor. My sort of impression, without looking into it, is that it shouldn't apply to home rule municipalities like you supposed. I think that legislators might recognize that, and that I'm going to sort of assume that it's more intended for those local governments where the state actually conducts their elections, where they're not very organized, they're not very large and so forth. So maybe that's more about that kind of system. I can't be sure, and I'm just guessing at a lot of stuff, but we do need to monitor and look into it. So I will try before our next committee meeting to come back and maybe have more informed commentary on what this bill does and what its effect might be for us, if any.
Okay.
I would just follow up on that quickly, Mr. Peterson, in that while it would be a fair and reasonable assumption to make that the initial bill did not attempt to take away the rights of a home rule municipality, I don't actually believe that to be the case. But I also believe that there is a second version already proffered that might have stepped back from the ledge that was initially proposed. And so I certainly look forward to your further investigation, Mr. Gates, so we can understand the ramifications.
Yeah, why don't we actually put that on the agenda for next month so that we can follow up on that, and we'll keep track of that bill as it works its way through the committees down in Juneau. Ms. LaFrance has got a comment. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow on Ms. Jones's comments and her thanks to the elections team for providing more opportunities for citizens to vote. I think that's fantastic. And also wanted to say thank you to Ms. McConnell and Ms. Jones for all their work on the Title 28 revisions. And I very much appreciate the time that was spent in responding to questions from the public and compiling additional frequently asked question sheets. And I think that was very helpful, and I very much appreciate all your work. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. And Ms. Kennedy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been watching the legislation as well, and I've had a conversation with Senator Shower and his staff, and you know, they were not really familiar with how our vote by mail worked, but so they're learning as well. But they've also mentioned that. Well, if you look at the legislation itself, it doesn't say that they would basically be prohibiting vote by mail. They would just say that you could do the vote by mail as long as you had voter consent for that. So it would kind of have to turn around. We would have to have something similar to what we do right now with sending out the advance cards that you're going to have some kind of a ballot coming to your house, and people would basically have to say, yes, that's what I want. So, I mean, even I don't think it's going to get to that extent in terms of what we do here in the municipality, but it also was never designed to basically prohibit any kind of vote in mailing. I think one of the things that is a little confusing about all of this is the terminology we use. So I think if anything, we ought to be talking a little bit about really making a distinction between what, to a certain extent, it's mail out balloting is what we do. We mail out the ballots. But we already have a process by which people can mail in a ballot, which is basically just absentee voting. So I think there's some confusion there, and we might think about maybe coming up with a better name for our process. But again, the legislation right now is never in there does it say it will prohibit any kind of mail-in balloting. It just says that you would have to have voter permission to do that. So again, if it comes down to that, I think we could work through that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And next time you're speaking with Senator Shower or his office, give them an invitation for a tour of the election center. I think, you know, other people have had a lot of questions about vote by mail that have taken the tour, felt much more comfortable with our vote by mail system after seeing it how it works. And it's pretty impressive for those of it who have gone
and
down.
That invitation has been given, and in fact, Ms. Jones and the clerk's office has even extended the invitation themselves. So we're kind of working on how to make that easier for them, considering they're in Juneau and we're here. But anyway, I think there are some ways to do that, including some things that have already been done by the clerk's office to basically show what the process is like. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And Mr. Constant has a question.
Yeah, you know, Erica, it's in the age of Zoom. I know you've announced tours for the public, and I do intend to come down and grab another one just for an update on how things are working, what may have changed in the building. But have we contemplated, oh, and I know that Landmine did a really great video a few years back. If we contemplated using our current paradigm, which would be a Teams or a Zoom or a Facebook Live tour of the election operation and how it works, that could be broadly announced, and hopefully we can capture some media attention so people can see a tour of how it works anytime.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant, in I think it was 2018, there was a video tour created of the election center by the fire department video center. It's about 4 minutes long, and it is posted on our main webpage. So that does give a good overview of the process and a tour of the election center. I gave a tour to the municipal manager yesterday, and it took 40 to 45 minutes. So obviously there's a great deal of difference between 4 minutes and 45 minutes. So we're discussing how to address this. I have some concerns about posting a 45-minute tour on a website, because who's going to really want to watch that? But Ms. Jones and I are discussing how to address this in this day and age.
Yeah, it just seems like a great opportunity to have a big Zoom Facebook Live event that celebrates the process and walks people through, and kind of, if it were tied toward when the ballots are going to be arriving, it could raise attention and awareness around the idea that the ballots are coming, and this opportunity is going to be in your hands very soon, and this is what's going to happen when you turn it back in. So it could be really live and contemporary, and maybe even a little bit fun, which I know is asking a lot for those of us who don't like to be in front of cameras, but just an idea.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Wheeler has typed a comment into the chat here. Just a further comment on SB 39. The current bill says the voter has to opt in, is Alaska Statute 29.26.010 is amended by adding a new subsection that reads, a municipality may not mail a general or special election ballot to a voter unless the voter affirmatively requests to vote by mail in that election. However, it does not currently prohibit home rule from doing otherwise, as per Alaska Statute 29.10.200. Similar to the earlier question on an in-person status for voters, we have no tools in place for this opt-in at this time. So do we need to create some tools for an opt-in? Or might have to do that if this particular piece of legislation passes the legislature and is signed into law. But that's something we'll have to track as we're going forward. And any other questions or comments?
Yeah, one last thing. It's a little bit off track. Dennis, I don't know if you saw the email I sent you last night.
I did. Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to, this is not necessarily the germane committee to talk about it, but I wanted to thank you for your work that you provided on an ordinance that passed last night, because with just a handful of words, your work literally transformed the future of businesses who are trying to make it in perpetuity as long as the state's in agreement. And so that little tiny change was so fundamental. I just want to thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And Ms. Kennedy has a question.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's actually a comment if you're talking about just kind of items of interest. I think one of the things that I'm still hearing are questions again about the voting process, and whether or not it can be trusted, and whether or not we have more potential for fraud or cheating of some sort. And so anyway, so I've been encouraging my constituents to ask their questions, and I know we have a pretty good breakdown of the frequently asked questions that are on the elections page on the website, and I think that's helpful. And but I just, like I said, I'm really encouraging people to ask those hard questions about how we actually can explain how the system works. And if they ask a question that's too hard and we can't answer it well, then I think that's probably where we should probably put some focus, just in helping to assure the public about the process. And, I think we all know there is no such thing as a perfect process. If somebody, we know just with, computer hacking and that, if somebody's bent on cheating or stealing something, or they're probably going to do it. We just have to make sure then that we have ways of catching those things. And to a certain extent, that really is what some of our process is about, is trying to figure out how to catch somebody who might be trying to cheat. And that's reasonable, that's rational. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I hope that we will entertain these questions from the public, just in that effort to say, okay, that's a valid question and here's the answer. Or if there's not a good answer then we figure out, how to answer that, just all in an effort to make sure that the public can be reassured about the validity of the process. And I think we're all about that. We want to make sure that people can trust what happens to their vote. And I think at this point, certainly the clerk's office has done a lot to try to be responsive to that. So anyway, again, if we have questions, I think we ought to make sure that we're answering them. If we're getting questions, we ought to make sure we're answering them. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Do you have a comment, Ms. Jones?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thanks to Ms. Kennedy for bringing up the FAQs, and as a result, the chair updated the agenda to include a review of the FAQs, and we sent that out to everybody. And our Miss Kennedy's questions resulted in 4 new FAQs. We are in the process. We've sent the answers, the Q&A to Miss Kennedy and Mr. Peterson, and we're in the process of posting that on the website. We also got a few from Miss Allard, and we're in the process of preparing those responses and getting those up on the website. So thank you to everyone who's helping us understand what questions your constituents are asking and allowing us to develop those Q&As and get back to you and them.
Well, thank you, Ms. Jones. It's it's getting to be a pretty extensive list of questions and answers at this point. But if people keep finding additional questions, we'll keep producing the answers to those questions. Do I have any additional comments or questions today? We're getting down to the last few minutes here.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. McConnell.
thank you. I know we are getting down to the last few minutes, but we are supposed to discuss first quarter budget revisions that the committee may wish to request.
Okay, well, we'll be coming up on that here in about 6 weeks or so. So do we have any budget, first quarter budget requests or questions about our budget requests for next year? I don't see anything coming up. Well, we'll have to keep thinking about that, and if we need to make a change. Mr. Wheeler, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, on the budget question, I hope Barbara doesn't mind my jumping in here, but if the assembly were to consider some changes such as things about in-person status or opting in, those sorts of things, you'd really be looking at trying to do it with this budget year, because you have to make software changes that need to be rolled out and tested before the clerk's office gets into the election cycle in January. Just a heads up on anything regarding changing what we do for elections, that you might have to do it earlier than you might otherwise be thinking. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Wheeler. That's a good point. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. Do we have any public participation? Any member of the public that would like to participate?
Hello.
Is that you, Mr. Haberman?
Yeah, but it's 12:58. Can you do a motion to extend at least 5 more minutes? Because that's a short window.
You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, let's extend for a couple minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Haberman.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll set my timer. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, Alaska resident for 43 years. Please note to remind you that I go back, and I brought myself back in the picture with the election of 2012, and where more than 40% of the polling precincts ran out of ballots, even though they printed enough in the Anchorage election. That's what brought me in, and I'm here. I continue to be closely monitoring what's going on. Now, there was a presentation by the state on the registration database for voters before you at this meeting. But that presentation and copy of it was not even on the website for the public to see. And this remote meeting, the only ability for the public to follow was connecting audio, listening in, whereas you were able to visually see at another connection the presentation, and the public was not. It was also creating a more confusion in what exactly was before you, which is not the appropriate thing to do. I'd also like to just a quick reminder. There's a rules committee meeting tomorrow. It'll be at the assembly. Option for people to be in person at the assembly chambers at LUSAC. I did note from the lead security last night, he was not aware of that meeting, and please make sure those doors are open for the public to come in. And that meeting starts at 11 o'clock tomorrow. I could say a lot of things on what was said here today. I am continuing to, oh yeah, a footnote. When I'm speaking to you right now, I have no clear picture of anyone really listening to me who's left the meeting by this distance. And then when you started the meeting when you did the roll call, that didn't get part of the tape recording, because as soon as you finished the roll call, I heard a voice announcement that says this meeting is now being recorded. So you need to get that recording hit, and then you start the meeting with roll call. That way it's on the record who is attending the meeting. And that's basically it. But I'm continue to be more concerning. Also, to leave you with this last thought. I am concerned about the municipality of Anchorage operating and handling elections outside the municipality of Anchorage and like the Southeast. Whoever decided that, this was a surprise to me. I caught wind of it, but that should have been brought up before the assembly at the regular assembly meeting and should have had public conversation about it. And thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Haberman. I guess I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, Ms. Kennedy?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Haberman understood that the Rules Committee is actually on Friday, not tomorrow. Just clarifying and correcting that. Thank you.
Rules
And
Committee is-
I'll second the adjournment.
I meant Friday, but thank you. I meant to say Friday, 11 o'clock. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We are adjourned.